see. Let me share my screen. Okay. You can see that okay?
Yeah.
Cool. So I did Huntington.
Did you start the recording?
Yeah, I started the recording.
Okay.
I did Huntington. My one sentence summaries, 2 sentence summaries, because this was one of the few pieces that was published in the 90s that didn't have like a rosy outlook on the future. Let's see. He described several fault lines, gave predictions that turned out to be mostly correct. So, the general thesis of this book is that like international politics is being drawn along civilizational lines, not along state lines anymore. So it's kind of like realism, but like going up one level of analysis, so to speak. So like the unit of analysis becomes the civilization, not the states. And he describes civilization as like kind of the shared cultural, historical, and religious and social, sort of like a shared identity on those four categories. So he is asking, what's the future of international politics? How will the dividing lines be drawn? The first couple of chapters, I think, are the most important to read. First one, he talks about how kind of gets into what like civilizational rivalries are, and goes into like different IR paradigms. So he has like the one world one, which is like the Fukuyama, the two worlds, like us and them, type worlds, which is, I think, like quasi-Marxist. So basically like the world's divided into like a global north and south, or a developed and developing, or east and west. And the third paradigm he calls the 184 states, more or less, which is realism. So looking at states as the unit of analysis. And then number 4 he calls the sheer chaos of ethnic intrastate conflict. So he says that his theory kind of is a middle ground between 3 and 4. And he calls it the civilizational model. Then chapter 2, he goes into the definition of civilizations, and he says that he's talking about civilization as a plural, not as a singular. So plural being there's a lot of different civilizations, and the singular is like we are the civilized world against the non-civilized. So he's saying, no, I'm talking about plural civilization. So he's not saying like the West, for example, is the best civilization. He's just saying that the West is a civilization. Let's see, and then goes into how civilizations are created and defined, and says that there's 7 and maybe 8 civilizations, which is kind of interesting. His like maybe civilization is African. You'd expect it to be Latin American. At least I would expect it to be Latin American. But he says it's Chinese, Japanese, Hindu, Islamic, Orthodox, which is like Russian, Eastern Europe, Western, Latin American, and maybe African. From there, he kind of goes into a sort of historical and a like kind of proving his theory type thing. And at this point, I rated it as a 6 on the confidence level, because most of this was just historical things, and so I skipped a lot of the historical things as I went down. But I might have missed something in there. I don't think I did, but I might have. So chapter 3, universal civilization. Are we becoming a universal civilization? No. Chapter 4, the West is the most powerful, but people look at like either the West is dominant and controls the rest of the world, or that the West is in decline. But both are kind of true. 5, demographics and economics are pushing a rise in China and the Middle East. 6, global politics is being reconfigured. And then how he also goes in chapter 6 into how new civilizations are formed. or how do states go from one civilization to another. Chapter 7, let's see, the core states of major civilization are supplanting the two Cold War superpowers as the principal poles of attraction. So what like that basically means is that each civilization has a core state that all of the other civilizations are starting to align themselves with. So for the West, it's the U.S. and Europe is kind of aligning itself with the with China. It's China. With the Chinese one, it's the Middle East. It's between like Iran and Saudi Arabia, and I think that's why he says that he doesn't know if Africa is its own civilization, because it's not really grouping along a core state. Let's see, and he says this is how he gets into the realism, has its bandwagoning or buck passing, and he says, and balancing. So he says that countries bandwagon with states of a similar culture and balance against states of a that's as difficult, that should be different culture. Let's see, Chapter 9, Civilizations are the ultimate human tribes, and the clash of them is a tribal conflict on global scale. Says there's going to be fault line conflicts since civilizations now touch in a way that they didn't really before. Chapter 10 and 11 go into his fault line wars, and then Chapter 12 he concludes. Begin Chapter 12 by saying history ends at least once a civilization. People believe theirs is the final form of human society. So he's referencing or attacking Fukuyama on that one. And he says the West, contrary to those who think it's the end of history, is failing. Says there could be a global war, but it isn't likely. But then goes through what like a war with China would look like. So that's essentially clash of civilizations. Let's see.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah, I know, like, from my own reading of that, it seems like there are places where he has issues defining what actually is a civilization. I think particularly with the fault line issue. I know that in Causes of War, Dr. Campbell emphasizes that as a weakness in Huntington's argument. Like, I think he uses the example of, is Iran and Saudi Arabia, for example, like, are they both part of a Middle Eastern civilization, or is it an Arab and a Persian civilization? So, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, my big issue with Huntington, I think, is that, like, his predictions were generally right, but it is somewhat falsifiable. He kind of outlines what makes up a civilization, but then it's easy to go like, oh, any war that happens is a civilizational war if you just draw the boundary in the right way.
Yeah. Peru and Ecuador.
And I think more recently there's been actually less civilizational war, like within the past 5 or so years.
Like Russia, Ukraine,
the Armenia, Azerbaijan. There's always wars in Africa and
right.
Yeah. So I think he was right in that he called the Middle East for like the 2000s, but I don't quite know if it holds as well now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. Where is the share button? There we go. Let's see here. All right. That's not it. There we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. So this is Mao's On Guerrilla Warfare, which is part 1 of the Red Book on guerrilla warfare. So my one-sentence summary is that mobile guerrilla units working in tandem with conventional troops, along with popular support and a clear political goal, is the winning formula for how to wage guerrilla war. So this doesn't quite fit into like a paradigm neatly in the normal sense, but Maoism is its own variant of communism. It's more pure Leninist and less strongman, so it's different than Stalinism. Its big hallmark is that it tries to place politics at every level. So it tries to go all the way down, which is a theme throughout the Red Book. So the broad question is how to fight a guerrilla war, and the context is the Japanese invasion of China in the 30s. So it's a manual / manifesto on what guerrilla warfare is like and how to fight it. So it's divided up into 7 chapters. The first chapter is emphasizing the point of how guerrilla war has to be fought alongside conventional military and must, most importantly, be done with a clear, defined political goal in mind. Guerrilla warfare is not an independent form of warfare, but is a step along the way in realizing the revolution. To launch a guerrilla warfare, the following prerequisites must be met, and there are several lists throughout the book which are handy. But to launch a guerrilla war, you have to meet these 7 goals. You have to arouse and organize the people. You have to achieve internal unification politically. You have to establish bases, equip your forces, recover the national strength, destroy the enemy's national strength, and regain lost territory. So to pull this off, the leaders of guerrilla movements have to be resolute, loyal, sincere, robust, able to cope with counter-propaganda, and employ a strategy based on alertness, mobility, and attack. It must be adjusted to the enemy situation, terrain, lines of communication, relative strengths, weather, and the situation of the people. So Chapter 2 is more in-depth on the need for popular support for the guerrilla movement. Guerrillas are distinct from conventional troops in that they don't fight decisive pitched battles. They have a decentralized command structure to permit greater flexibility for the guerrilla hit-and-run, sabotage-style tactics. Being quick and mobile is very important. This emphasis on mobility is the number 1 element in guerrilla strategy. Chapter 3 is a historical case study of guerrilla movements. So he talks a bit about Napoleon and the Italians in Abyssinia. So the distinction between his studies are the ones that were able to be mobile worked, and the ones that weren't able to be mobile, such as the Abyssinians against the Italians, didn't work. The biggest killer of a guerrilla movement is apathy. So if the people don't buy into the political goals of the guerrilla campaign, it will almost certainly fail. And if it can't be fought in a mobile way, it will also likely fail. The 4th chapter emphasizes that the guerrilla war's virtue lies in exhausting and wearing down a conventional enemy. So this is very contextualized in how the Chinese United Front are fighting the occupying Japanese. So they infiltrate and cause revolts behind enemy lines, force the Japanese to spread themselves thin and bleed resources. And he says for his particular situation that if the Chinese guerrillas can keep this up for 3 years, the Japanese occupation collapses. And I'm not sure if that's actually true historically, but I mean, obviously it worked, but I don't know how long that actually took. So the 5th chapter is about where to find guerrilla fighters. So first of all, from the people, from regular army units that are detached from the conventional army, that are assigned to guerrilla units to help reinforce them, give them more discipline. From regular army units that are permanently detached from the conventional military, from a combination or a mixing of the regular unit and then the people, from a local militia, from enemy deserters, and from former bandit groups. So what's interesting here is that it seems like the bar for what can be a guerrilla is actually pretty low, but Mao says this is actually a strength because it helps get the people to buy in, that people are involved, and it diversifies the strengths of the movement because of all the different types of fighters. He notes that guerrilla fighting disposes of this idea of the fighting age male as being the combatant because by this point in the war with the Japanese occupation, a lot of fighting age men are already removed from their locales because they've been drafted or they're working in labor camps or something like that. The importance of foraging arms from the enemy and securing the aid of the Western allies are highlighted here. Guerrilla movements have to be more organized the higher up you go. But he says that at lower levels you can be more decentralized, and actually he says to the point where lower levels, so I guess like platoon, squad, and below, they don't even need phones and radios, but from the regiment level up, you do. So the sixth chapter returns back to this idea that the political goal is important. And he says you can't even forget the political goal for a moment because apathy might seep in, and apathy is the big killer of guerrilla wars. So in order to do this, the leader must do the following political activities, which are applied first to the troops, the people, and the enemy. So these are the spiritual unification of officers and men within the army, so that's the troops. And the second is the spiritual unification of the army and the people, so that's applied to the people. And the third is the destruction of the unity of the enemy, so that's applied to the enemy. So then he says that the discipline of all guerrillas is internally based. So it means that the discipline is based on the fighter's conviction or buy-in to the movement. Discipline in a guerrilla movement cannot happen externally, so it cannot be compelled from the superiors. And then this chapter ends on observing a code of how to deal with locals, which is predicated on respect. So there are 3 hard rules, which are all actions are subject to command, do not steal from people, and do not be selfish or unjust. And then he follows these 3 rules with 8 remarks, which are replace the door when you are leaving, roll up the bedding you slept on, be courteous, be courteous, be honest in your transactions, return what you borrow, replace what you break, do not bathe in the presence of women, and do not search those you arrest without prior authorization. And then the final chapter is Mao reiterates that guerrilla war is not an aberration, but it's a supplement to conventional operations. So when the enemy doesn't adequately garrison his territory, guerrillas should try to conduct a war on exterior lines, so that's being behind the enemy lines, stretch them thin, make them bleed supplies. Second, establish bases, and third, extend the war areas. And then he ends with, or next he gives 6 recommendations on how to make a guerrilla movement sustainable. So he says, first, retain the initiative, so that's, again, mobility. Conduct of operations to complement those of the regular army, establish bases, a clear understanding of the relationship that exists between the attack and the defense, the development of mobile operations, and finally, correct command. And most important out of these is retaining the initiative, because that's related to being mobile in war, because it preserves your freedom of action and prevents you from just reacting to what the enemy is doing. And guerrillas are well suited to this because of the decentralized command structure that they have. And then popular support allows for sort of like a maximum mobility, because you're able to collaborate with the locals and the sort of turn the whole country against the occupying force sort of thing. Misleading the enemy is also key, particularly in avoiding a pitched battle, or when he says when things get serious. Guerrillas should employ tactics that throw the enemy off the scent. And this particular part of the book is very Sun Tzu-esque. So it's like he had Sun Tzu like right next to him while he wrote this part. Mm-hmm. So he says, strike and disperse. And then finally, the last thing is there are 3 areas of operation for guerrillas. Strategic operation, which is harassing the enemy in support of the national objective. So it's indirect support of the conventional force. Tactical is more direct. You are supporting conventional operations of the normal army by sabotaging and disrupting supply lines and communications. And then the most direct form is battle cooperation, which is sentry duty, closing roads, stuff like that. Most direct support role in relation to conventional forces. And I gave this an 8 overall because it's a short piece and it's pretty clear what its emphasis on politics and mobility are, I think, are probably the biggest 2 lessons to take out of this. Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've read it too. I think because we had grand strategy with it, right?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So that's pretty much aligned with what I remember from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think that's good. I don't have any questions. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Cool. When or do you want to do the next one Thursday,
Um,
or have
yeah.
you gonna be able to read another book